this talk will be about why you should care about information theoretic cryptography, even if all you do is the other type of cryptography. Okay, so information theoretic MPC specifically is useful even when there is no honest majority. So when there is no honest majority, we cannot get information theoretic MPC in the standard model of using point-to-point channels, and still we can get meaningful notions of information theoretic security even in the case of no honest majority, and moreover, we can apply information theoretic security even when eventually we're shooting for computational security. So this type of connection, I think it really brings together in unexpected and fruitful ways different parts of the crypto research and different parts of the crypto community. And it gives us new results and applications that apply techniques from the information theoretic domain in the context of crypto with no honest majority. And it also gives us new questions that are motivated by new applications for information theoretic MPC. Okay, so let's look at these fictional characters. Alison, she's a student at MIT, and Bernard, he's, I don't know, pick your place, CWI. Alison is really into zero-knowledge proofs, efficient two-party protocols, everything computational, complexity-based. Bernard is into these information theoretic protocols and honest majority MPC. Traditionally, we were used to having ideas from complexity-based cryptography at least heavily inspire solutions to problems in information theoretic cryptography. This was the usual direction in which techniques or ideas were imported. And there was almost no, perhaps in the context of MPC and zero knowledge, there was almost no, certainly no generic way of exporting techniques from the information theoretic domain to the computational domain. So this is an actual dialogue that took place between these two fictional characters. You know, Bernard was super excited about his new idea for VSS, and Alison is not really into that. Okay, so how can we help make the match? So one bridge between them is to add to Alison's world, the two-party world, some simple ideal functionality. So if we talk about zero-knowledge protocols, then the right ideal functionality will be some ideal commitment oracle, like a box you can lock things inside, and they're perfectly hidden, and it's perfectly binding. Okay, we call it COM hybrid, commitment hybrid model. A more powerful oracle, in a sense, is an OT oracle that I described 2 days ago, and you heard about elsewhere. An oblivious transfer is just this box that takes 2 inputs from the sender and a single bit from the receiver and delivers to the receiver the selected input of the sender and nothing else. So a model where we give this OT hybrid, ideal OT, to any pair of parties is referred to as an OT hybrid model. We can even go beyond these specific functionalities and say that we're okay, we don't want to give Alice and Bob, the two parties, access to a trusted party that does what they want, because this trivializes the question. But let's allow them to get a sample from a suitable source of correlated randomness. Okay, so this is an input-independent functionality. It doesn't have any inputs, it just samples correlated randomness, and we give Alice and Bob access to this functionality. Again, it doesn't trivialize the questions. So this makes information theoretic and conditional UC security possible, really analogous to secure channels in the information theoretic world. Even in the information theoretic world, we assume we have some infrastructure. This gives a more elaborate infrastructure that suffices for doing zero knowledge or 2PC with no honest majority. So why should she be happy with this augmented world? She doesn't lose anything she likes, right? It just gives her more tools to write protocols. And then we can use composition theorems that I briefly mentioned, like the UC composition and other theorems, to substitute. So Ellison, she has her own OT protocol, her own commitment protocol, and if they satisfy the right security properties, you can just plug and play these implementations into solutions that assume ideal implementations. Okay, this is really a major motivation for studying composition in MPC. That we can design a protocol in a modular way. First, assume that we have these ideal boxes that do simple things, and then substitute each invocation of an ideal box by a protocol which is proved secure in the computational model. And we get, in the end, computational security. Okay, so this is about generality. We can realize, and it's not just about modularity, but really there is a lot of research into, say, under which assumptions we can get two-round oblivious transfer with active security, right? Even very recent works on the topic. And now you can just plug and play. Every new result on the topic, you can use it if you design protocols based on ideal OT. So this is generality in multiple aspects of generality, right? You can take a code and port it, right, that implements OT. Multiple benefits of this type of generality. And finally, efficiency. If we look at the most liberal form of helper, this correlated randomness, it still has the advantage that we can run any secure protocol to generate it before our actual inputs are known, because correlated randomness is input independent. So we can just pre-process this correlated randomness by using a less efficient protocol, but then offline time is cheap, right? When you press the space bar on your laptop and it wakes up immediately, this is because of pre-processing that the laptop is doing while it's sleeping. And finally, these more simpler types of oracles, like commitment oracle and OT oracle, have very fast implementations. Okay, so here I'm doing a plug for some recent work on generating OTs without a lot of communication in a fast way. Okay, so let me start by, I wanted to note that, again, in this talk I will just give a very partial view of how information theoretic MPC helps complexity-based crypto. I guess that in Benny's talk you'll hear some other examples that are really unexpected of how constant round MPC questions in the information theoretic setting had impact in complexity-based crypto. So I'm leaving something. This is not intended to be a comprehensive survey. Okay, let me start with MPC given correlated randomness. There's a question of feasibility and there's a question of efficiency. Let me start by showing what is probably the simplest feasibility result of how to compute every function securely. Okay, you can think of it as the analog of one-time pad encryption for secure computation. So let's consider for simplicity the two-party setting. There is Alice and Bob. Each of them can be corrupted. For now, think of a passive corruption. And we have this trusted dealer. The trusted dealer is an offline dealer. He cannot be asked to compute the function on the inputs, but the trusted dealer just produces correlated randomness from a prescribed correlation and then destroys itself or destroys its state. Okay, so this is the setup. We start with this RA and RB that are sampled from some predefined joint distribution. And now Alice and Bob get their inputs X and Y. They exchange messages. Based on these messages, they should figure out the output and shouldn't learn anything in a perfect sense about the other input beyond the output. Okay, so here is a solution, a very simple solution. Let me go back. So the correlated randomness is picked in the following way. So first, we view the function as a matrix. So think of the rows of the matrix as corresponding to Alice's input X and the columns corresponding to Bob's input Y. I was confused, of course. So the columns are X, the rows are Y. X is the horizontal direction. Okay, so now what do we do with this matrix? We pick a random shift dx in the horizontal direction and a random shift dy in the vertical direction. And we define a new matrix, which is just the original truth table shifted by dx horizontally, cyclically, and by dy vertically. So we call this shifted table G. And this is just the formal way to describe this G, where subtraction is done modulo the domain size. Okay, this is visually what we do. We take the original table and rotate it by dx horizontally and dy vertically. Now, what does the dealer do? So first, the dealer does this rotation. It has to be secret. So dx and dy, the dealer, these are secret values picked by the dealer. And now the dealer just secret shares this shifted table G using a 2 out of 2 secret sharing between Alice and Bob. So each of them gets one share of the shifted truth table. Okay, so RA and RB are the shares of the shifted truth table. And now how does the protocol work? It's very simple, right? The parties do not know which point in the original truth table they want to reveal, right? That's a secret, that's XY. However, they can afford to reveal the point, the shifted point, because the shifted truth table basically masks the original location. So it's okay to reveal the location of the output in the shifted truth table. So to enable this, the dealer just gives dx to Alice. That's the mask of Alice's input, and dy to Bob. That's part of the correlated randomness. So again, the correlated randomness, just to be more clear about it, the correlated randomness includes the following. Alice gets dx and one share of the shifted table. Bob gets dy and the other share of the shifted table. That's the correlated randomness. And now the protocol uses 2 rounds. In the first round, every party masks her input with the corresponding value, random value, dx or dy she got from the dealer. And they exchange these values. Okay, so that's okay. It doesn't give any information about the inputs, but it does reveal precisely the location in the shifted truth table where the output is located. And now in the second round, each party just sends the corresponding, the right location in her share of the shifted truth table, and the parties just reconstruct the output by adding these shares of the output. Okay, so very simple protocol. If there is any question, please ask, but it's really not much more complicated than a one-time pad encryption. Is this protocol good? Do you think it's a good protocol? Like, does it have, let's look at the bright side. I mean, it has several downsides, but can you say anything in favor of this protocol? Like, what is an attractive feature of this protocol that we don't see in usual protocols? What about the online communication complexity? So let's ignore the communication, the offline communication from the dealer. What about the online communication? It's great. Why is it great? Yeah, it's essentially optimal. Okay, if the inputs are different sizes, if one input is short and one is long, it's not optimal. For PIR, for instance, this is a very bad protocol. But when the inputs are of the same size, then it's essentially optimal for typical functions. The bad side here is that it's really like the dealer is sending some truth table, right? So this is exponential in the input length, and for most use cases, this is infeasible, most but not all. In some cases, we do want to compute complex functions with small input domain, then this approach can be attractive. And it's not only that the communication in the offline phase, but all this exponential amount of information needs to be stored. Okay, now a clean complexity. So we said that in terms of online communication, it's good. What about the amount of randomness? So the only randomness is the randomness distributed by the dealer. The question is, can we improve it, right? So the protocol has exponential amount of randomness. Can we use less randomness? So it turns out that using very similar techniques, even simpler to the ones that we use in the honest majority setting, and we'll see it, we can process a function gate by gate. So this is not using a truth table, but using some circuit representation. And then the amount of randomness that the dealer sends only needs to be proportional to the circuit size. So if the function is computable in polynomial time, then the amount of randomness will only be polynomial rather than exponential. Okay, and we'll see how this is done. In fact, in a more generic way. But more interestingly, what about every f, right? So this should remind you of a question I asked in a different context about honest majority MPC. And the question is, can we use less randomness for every f? And it turns out, if you think about it, this is, including the dealer, this is some instance, some model for honest majority MPC. It turns out that there is a two-way relation, in fact, with three-server information theoretic PIR. So in particular, we can use the best construction that we heard about from Klim to get the randomness complexity to be roughly 2 to the square root of k, where k is the length of the inputs. So improving from 2 to the k to 2 to the square root k, super polynomial improvement. And if you get a better protocol, this would give better three-server PIR or better locally decodable codes in terms of randomness complexity. So the randomness is somehow linked to locally decodable codes. I'm slightly cheating here in the sense that we need to assume that the locally decodable code has a query generation which is somehow computationally efficient. But this is the case for all of the natural protocols that we know. So there's a slight caveat, but we do expect the answer to be the same. And situation for lower bounds is very bad. So if you want a clean question to pose to somebody, mathematician or somebody working in information theory, ask him about the randomness complexity of computing the worst function in this model. It's a different way of asking about locally decodable codes. Okay, so now let's convert from truth tables, which are always big, to circuits which are typically small for functions we care about computing. So this is, my presentation is a kind of a very simple and clean abstraction that kind of generalizes things that were done before by Beaver, or a version of what Beaver did. Damgard et al. In the context of a tiny tables protocol, and this is a joint work with Elet Boyle and Yves Gilboa that abstract things in a general way that has some interesting instantiations that I will describe. Okay, so we think of a circuit not as usual. Usually we think of a circuit as having, say, additions and multiplications or Boolean gates. Now we think of a circuit more abstractly. We think of each wire in living in a possibly different abelian group. So you can assign to every wire in the circuit some public abelian group. You know, it can be a group of matrices of a certain dimension over a certain ring. Okay? So each wire lives in a group, and each gate is just a mapping from the input wires to the output wire. Okay, abelian group allow us to mask. So what does the dealer do? The dealer prepares a random mask for every wire in the circuit. So wire Wi has masked Ri. Sends to each party the mass of the inputs, of the input wires owned by this party, right? So every input, say that the X inputs are owned by Alice and the Y inputs are owned by Bob. So Alice gets Rx1 and Rx2, and Bob gets Ry1 and Ry2. And the mask of the output wire is made public because the output wire has to anyway be public. Okay? What can we do up to this point with this type of correlated randomness? It doesn't sound like an interesting kind of correlated randomness, but what can we do with it? Well, the parties can reveal their masked inputs to each other. It's okay to reveal the masked input because it hides the input. It's a one-time pad encryption. Okay, good. So we've made some progress, and we want to continue all the way to the end, because if we reveal the masked output and we know the mask, then we reveal the output. So we basically want to continue to maintain the invariant that we know the masked value of every wire in the circuit. So how do we penetrate this stubborn G1 gate? So this G1 gate might compute some crazy function. It's a nonlinear function. If it were addition over the same group, we could do it for free. But this will be some kind of a nonlinear gate. What do we do? So if you think about it, you can consider a class of offset functions that map must inputs to must output. The dealer knows this offset function. So the dealer knows, hey, this is a function that the parties want to compute on the must inputs to get the must output. How is the function defined? Well, first subtract this value R1 from the first must input, subtract R2 from the second must input, apply G1, and then add R5 to the output. So this is a function that the dealer knows, but he cannot tell it to any of the parties because the description of this function contains the mass that protect the inputs. So what can the dealer do if it cannot tell the parties, this is the function I want you to apply? What can the dealer do? Secret share this function. Okay, and we secret share this function, just view this function as a vector. This is like additive secret sharing of a function. So each party gets a function such that the party received by each party looks random, and the sum of the two functions on every input is the value of the function that the dealer wants to secret share. So this primitive, so this is like the offset function. So the offset function G prime 1, it takes the must inputs W prime 1 and W prime 2, and it first unmass, then applies G1, and then mass using R5. This is a secret function. The dealer wants to split it between the two parties, and the splitting, additive splitting of a function is a primitive known as function secret sharing, which is exactly the same as the homomorphic secret sharing primitive I described 2 days ago, except that the role of the function and the input is flipped. But you can think of it as being just the same primitive. Okay, so the goal of the dealer is to take this secret function G prime 1, splits it into two shares F1 and F2 such that each of them hides the function G prime 1. And now if you have these two functions should add in the same sense of calculus, right? So pointwise these two functions add to the function F or G prime 1 that we secret shared. So that's the role of the dealer. For every gate it has this offset function that maps the must inputs to the must output. And the goal of the dealer is to split this conversion function between the two parties. And the question is, how can this be done? Okay, but why is it enough? So if the dealer splits G prime 1 into two functions, each party can just locally evaluate his part of G prime 1, and then they add up the outputs. And because the splitting is a secret sharing of the function, it's safe to do. It doesn't reveal. The function itself is the thing we want to hide. Okay, so now the question is, okay, so it's like I described HSS for a class F, so here we have FSS for a class F. It's a class of functions that is defined by the gate G1, and each function in the class, we call it the offset class of a gate G1, it is specified by the input mask and the output mask. Okay, so it's a collection of functions that basically subtract from the input some masks, apply G1, and then add to the output a mask. It's a collection that is defined by the mask. And the question is, if we look at interesting gates, what type of offset class do they induce? Again, the offset class is just giving this extra degree of freedom of shifting the input, applying the function, the gate, and then shifting the output. So if you start with an arbitrary gate that computes any function, also the offset class is any function, right? It doesn't matter if you shift the inputs, it's an arbitrary function. And then the trivial FSS for sharing an arbitrary function is just secret share the truth table of the function. This always works, but it's inefficient. What about ring multiplication? Here it's not, I don't need a field. It's not like in the BGW case where you need a field. It can work over any ring. It easily generalizes to any kind of bilinear maps. You can think of more general algebraic abstractions that are sometimes useful for MPC. but in this case, let's look at the ring multiplication. The offset class, right, so ring multiplication just multiplies two ring elements. If you consider the offset class, it's just an arbitrary degree 2 polynomial bivariate polynomial. This polynomial has 4 coefficients, so we can secret share this polynomial by just separately secret sharing each of the 4 coefficients. That's an FSS for the class of degree 2 bivariate polynomials. And in fact, you can compress it using pseudo-randomness to just one element. All the rest are compressible. So random stuff that is independent, you can compress. And in fact, if you use this instantiation, then you get something that's isomorphic to a protocol from a recent paper of Katz et al. That is actually useful for post-quantum signatures. It's been rediscovered by different groups, this protocol. But it has the property of communicating. In the online phase, you communicate just a single, each party communicates just a single ring element per multiplication gate. Okay, what about fancier gates? Equality, greater than, ReLU, bit decomposition, spline function. These are all types of computations that arise in the context of machine learning, numerical computations, and so on. It turns out that we were really lucky. If you look at the offset classes of these things, we have efficient, non-trivial, efficient function secret sharing schemes that are not information theoretic, but they use only symmetric crypto. They are concretely efficient and use symmetric crypto. So this is out of scope for this school, but almost in scope. It's only symmetric crypto. If you want, this is really like luck. Because this is pretty much all the functions we can do function secret sharing from. I mean, if you want general functions to share efficiently using FSS, you already need some fancy public key crypto stuff. But for these type of functions that correspond to natural gates, we can do with symmetric crypto. Okay, so how much time do we have? Good. So what are the features of this circuit-based protocol? So I think the most attractive feature is actually computation, especially if we compete with computational protocols like FHE and such. So in terms of computation, it's really as good as computing the function in the clear. If you look at most standard gates, so if you look at a circuit over a ring, say with additions and multiplications, then if you count the total number of ring operations performed by this protocol, it's really like a small constant times what you do in the clear. It's actually a cute question to try and minimize this constant. So if you have secure computation over a fast network and offline time is cheap, then this is really like doing secure computation for free, almost, if the network is very fast. Okay, this does generalize to more than 2 parties, and more interestingly, I mean, this extension to more than 2 parties is straightforward, but more interestingly, it extends to deal with active adversary that in most settings is much more challenging, but here it turns out to be quite easy if you have this trusted dealer, because what you essentially do is some lightweight authentication of the computation by multiplying all values with the same secret multiplier. So if you set up the correlated randomness such that each random value has a copy that is multiplied by this secret multiplier, you can maintain the invariant through the computation, and in the end you just need to check a very simple one-time MAC. So this is an idea originally due to Bendlin et al., and then it has been refined. And there's a whole line of practical MPC protocols collectively referred to as SPIDs that follow this approach. So it's an offline-online approach where the online phase is very lightweight. It uses this type of simple correlations, and the online cost of computation is very close to computing in the clear, at least for arithmetic circuits. So here, over general rings, it's a bit more tricky, but over a big finite field, this approach is very efficient. What about the dealer, right? What do we do with the dealer? We don't want a single point of failure, and the dealer is sort of a single point of failure. So we can, as I said before, we can emulate the dealer using an MPC protocol that is run offline before the inputs are known. So you just emulate the dealer by running a 2PC protocol. And we're getting better and better at compressing these types of simple correlated randomness and making the generation of many copies of simple correlations cheaper. Okay, so now let's, from now on, there is no dealer. From now on, the rest of this talk is about protocols in the standard setting where we don't have any trusted dealer. So first I want to give you a cute derivation of the same feasibility result that Gilad showed without polynomials. Okay, so if you look at the version of the truth table, it didn't involve any polynomials, right? There was just a simple 2 out of 2 secret sharing. Really, no, you have to be very imaginative to think of it as a polynomial. You can, though. Okay, so how can we bootstrap from this setting of 2 parties with a trusted dealer to honest majority, no trusted dealer? Let's do it in 2 steps. First step, let's just consider the dealer to be a third party. So now we want to do a 3PC protocol. So we have Alice, Bob, and Carol will have 2 roles. It will be a party with an input, Z, and it will be a dealer. So what Carol will do is will just secret share her input between Alice and Bob and generate correlated randomness for the previous protocol. Right? It doesn't matter if it's the truth table protocol or it can be the circuit-based protocol if you want to be efficient. Okay, so now we get a 3PC with security against one corrupted party because passively corrupted party because Carol alone doesn't. Knowing the correlated randomness doesn't help Carol unless she colludes with Alice or Bob. Cool, so we did get a feasibility result for 3PC with one passively corrupted party. If we want to move from 3 parties to 5 parties and so on, we can use, this is again, working it out formally is something that requires care, but in principle, just think of a process of replacing a party by a 3-party protocol. What do I mean by replacing a party by a 3-party protocol? You can think of a party as a functionality that receives inputs, messages, and delivers outputs, outgoing messages, right? Inputs are incoming messages, outputs are outgoing messages. So now I can say, hey, I want to, let's say that I have 5 parties. So I can start with a protocol, a 3PC protocol running between the first 3 parties. I'm not happy with this protocol because 2 parties can break it, and I want security against 2 out of 5. So I'm saying, okay, let me take the role of the first party and distribute it by a 3-party protocol. So this approach of virtualization, this is also what Bracha did in the context of Byzantine agreement, but in the context of MPC, which is more involved, it was introduced by Hirt and Maurer. And there is this paper from 7 years ago where we said, okay, let's try to apply this approach to bootstrap from a 3-party protocol, take your favorite model, to an n-party protocol with an honest majority. You can do it also for malicious security and so on. And it turns out that if you do this recursive virtualization of parties by protocols, you can do it in many ways, but if you do it in a way that is defined by a formula that has 3 input majority gates, this is the basis of gates, and the formula has logarithmic depth, say 10 log n, it turns out, using previous results of Valiant, that this will give you a protocol for n parties that resists any minority, like t less than n over 2, so optimal threshold, and moreover, the complexity of this protocol will only grow polynomially with the number of parties. That's the tricky part. Okay, so it's kind of like a non-trivial claim about Boolean logic, that if you take, you also, there is some non-explicit aspects. So take 10 log n deep complete ternary tree, where each node computes the majority of the 3 bits that feed into it. And now label every leaf of this tree by a random variable. Then almost always, except with exponentially small probability, this formula will compute the majority function of n bits. So this is a fact about Boolean algebra that translates into a way to bootstrap from 3 parties to n parties while blowing up communication and computation only polynomially. So 2 cute points I want to say. First of all, it's not just a different way of deriving, say, the BGW protocol. It's much less efficient. There are models of MPC where the algebra of Shamir secret sharing doesn't work. For instance, there's been a line of work on MPC over non-abelian group, where you have black box access to non-abelian group. You know, try to do Shamir secret sharing over a non-abelian group. Okay? So in this setting, we can easily get 3-party protocols, but it's much, much more complicated to get n-party protocols, and we do it using this approach. So there are certain MPC over black box algebraic structures that can benefit from this approach. But a caveat we had for this approach in the past was that we could not get a fully explicit construction. Okay, so there is this part of picking the leaves of this formula at random, so we can only do it under assumptions or reduce the amount of randomness. But this was kind of a question that quite a few people in the complexity theory community looked at, and I think very, very recently it has been resolved. So now we have an explicit construction that can allow us to make this approach fully explicit without any probability of error. That's the last paper, yeah. Okay, so the rest of the time I will talk about converting passive security to active security via the MPC in the head approach. And I guess that the starting point is that in most cases, right, when we have a trusted dealer, then the cost is relatively small, but with no trusted dealer, it's typically a pain to protect protocols against malicious parties, right? In this country, people by default do not follow instructions, unlike some other countries. So this makes our life somewhat more difficult, but we're used to it, so it's not as difficult as it sounds. And it's more difficult when you have no honest majority. So in this country, we do have an honest majority. Okay, so in particular, techniques like VSS, error correcting codes are not directly applicable. So a natural goal is to find cheaper ways of converting passive security into active security, especially in the case of protocols for no honest majority, say 2-party protocols. And that's really a major research effort. There is a lot of work by many people that goes in this direction. So a beautiful and something we often take for granted idea is this GMW paradigm, which uses zero-knowledge proofs to compile a protocol that is passively secure into one that is actively secure. And the idea is to have parties. Okay, first of all, why is there a challenge? The challenge is that if I want to prove that I sent the right message to you, then you need to know my secrets in order to know if I did the right thing, because what I'm supposed to do depends on secrets I cannot reveal. So the GMW paradigm says the following: use a commitment scheme to commit to your inputs, an actual commitment scheme, like a computational, it's a bit string, it's not an ideal commitment. And now use zero-knowledge proofs for NP to prove that the public message that I sent to everyone is consistent with the public commitment that I previously sent to everyone. So that's an NP statement, and you can apply the standard notion of zero-knowledge proofs to do it. This is really something that is a very general and very powerful use case of zero-knowledge proofs. Typically, it does not apply in the information theoretic setting. Why? Because zero-knowledge proofs, they need a centralized statement. And in the IT setting, the statement is distributed. We use communication not over public channels, but over point-to-point channels. But Nivstock will show an exception where we can actually use zero-knowledge a different zero-knowledge proof machinery, but still zero-knowledge proof machinery, to implement this GMW compiler in an information theoretic setting, and in fact with good concrete efficiency, but this is really an exception. And this exception applies, for now at least, for the case of no honest majority. Sorry, for the case of protocols with honest majority. Okay, GMW paradigm is beautiful, it's general, but it has many downsides, and I think that the downsides can be summarized by being non-black box, in a sense that you really have to get into the wires of the statement that you're proving, of the protocol, the primitives. It doesn't relativize in a cryptographic sense. So it's not enough to get Oracle access to the commitment primitive. You actually need to prove statement about the commitment process, which requires us to know the actual code of the commitment scheme that we used. And this manifests itself in many ways, this non-black box feature. We can have protocols that use different types of oracles. It can be an ideal OT oracle. GMW paradigm will not work. At the syntactic level, it fails because OT has some secret inputs. How do you prove in zero-knowledge statements about secret inputs? There are protocols that make a black box use of a cryptographic primitive, like a pseudo-random generator. Again, proving statements by using the code of the PRG is much less efficient than using the PRG in a black box way. And the type of examples I mentioned of protocols that make a black box use of different algebraic structures, it's often useful to reduce the circuit size, to use the structure of algebraic operations. So GMW approach is very inefficient in these cases. So we want some kind of a black box alternative. If you think of the dream goal of taking passively secure protocol and converting it in a black box way into an actively secure protocol, this goal is impossible. For instance, if you think of a zero-knowledge functionality, it has a trivial protocol in the passive case, right? I just tell you, hey, the statement is true, and you believe me because I'm honest. And obviously, this protocol cannot be used in a black box way to get actual zero-knowledge protocols against an active party. Okay, so this is a dream goal that we cannot get. Instead, we have some second-best alternatives where we play some kind of a black box game where we want to build a strong protocol for F. Instead, we settle for getting weaker protocols for F in certain well-defined sense, and then we use these weaker protocols in a black box way. And I'll show two examples of this approach that both fit into this MPC in the head paradigm. Yeah, so we have these, if F is fixed, then we do have results like result with Yiftach, Eyal, Yuda, and Erez, that shows that we can take semi-honest OT protocol or passively secure OT and use it in a black box to get actively secure OT, but this does not work for general functions. Okay, so the first result is something that allows us to get zero-knowledge protocols, two-party zero-knowledge protocols, from simple types of information theoretic MPC protocols. In particular, we can use the ones from the previous lecture. Okay, so what is a zero-knowledge proof? It's specified by an NP relation. It has the usual completeness and soundness requirements of proofs. So the prover, an honest prover should be able to convince an honest verifier that's completeness. Soundness means that even a malicious prover should not be able to convince an honest verifier except with small success probability. That's a soundness error. And zero knowledge says that whatever a verifier, even a malicious one, can observe could be simulated based on the statement alone without knowing the witness. Our goal is to use an MPC protocol, and in fact a simple type of MPC protocol, to realize zero-knowledge proof for the NP relation R. To this end, we define a functionality F. It's a multi-party functionality that is defined in a very simple way and in a black box way based on R. So the functionality F, there is this public input X that is input up in the sky. Everybody can see the statement. But the functionality F takes a piece of the witness WI from each party PI, adds up these pieces, and then applies R to the public statement and the sum of the pieces. You can think, looking forward, you can think of this as shares of the witness. But this is just a deterministic functionality. Okay, it's a deterministic functionality that takes a piece of the witness from every party, adds up the pieces, takes their XOR, and evaluates this verification predicate R. So if we had a protocol with malicious security for this R with n parties, then we could verify, right? Then we could just ask the prover, hey, please additive secret share the witness between the parties, and there is some issue about malicious party can violate completeness, but in principle, we could imagine, I mean, zero knowledge is an instance of secure two-party computation, so we could imagine zero knowledge being solved by MPC, but here we want to use a very simple type of MPC. Specifically, we want to use information theoretic MPC that is only passively secure, right? Even though zero knowledge is all about protecting against malicious parties, here we want to use secure computation that is secure against two passive or semi-honest parties. And in the information theoretic setting, it's enough to use 5 parties for this purpose. We can use the BGW, the semi-honest, the simple version of the BGW protocol to realize it. Okay, so if you give me any protocol pi for this functionality F, I will use it in a black box way to get a zero knowledge proof for the NP relation R. And for convenience, I will cast this zero knowledge proof using ideal commitment. So in the commitment hybrid model I mentioned in the beginning of the talk. So how does it work? Again, this is on the right, just to remind you, we're given a protocol pi which is secure, passively secure against two parties for this functionality F. So what does the prover do? What can the prover do? The prover has a witness. Well, it runs a virtual MPC protocol of 5 parties in its head. The protocol starts, the prover needs to choose an input for each party. How does the prover choose the input for each party? It just secret shares the witness W using a 5 out of 5 secret sharing scheme. Here n is 5. So it just tosses coins and splits the witness between the parties in a random way, such that in particular if n is at least 3, then no two parties will know anything about the witness. Now, this is how the MPC protocol is set up. These are the secret inputs of the parties, and now the prover runs in his head the way that the parties would actually run the protocol. So the prover just emulates the protocol, picks random coins for behalf of every party, and it generates this protocol that ends up with each party having a local view. Okay, the view of the party consists of its input, its randomness, and incoming messages. Outgoing messages are determined by this information. What does the prover do? Sends to the verifier a separate commitment for every view. So now the verifier has in its hand some locked box that contains each of the views. It cannot access these views without the help of the prover. What does the prover do? The prover wants to be convinced that indeed what the views contain is a good execution of the protocol on some inputs Wi that leads the parties to output 1. 1 corresponds to the relation R accepting. If indeed this is a good execution that ends up with everybody outputting 1, it means that the witness W that is defined as the XOR of all Wi does satisfy the relation, and the input is in the NP language. So how does the verifier get convinced? The easiest way to get convinced is to ask the prover, hey, please open all the commitments. Is this good? No, this will break zero knowledge. Instead, what the verifier can afford to do, because the MPC is secure against two parties, is just pick a pair of random parties and ask the prover, please open these 2 specific views. The prover has to comply, or else the verifier rejects. And now the verifier checks that these 2 views are, on the one hand, accepting, so the outputs of the parties is 1, they're happy, and that the 2 views are consistent in the sense that the messages that VI claims to receive from party J, right, that PI claims to receive in VI, are the same as the outgoing messages in the other view that are implicit in the other view. So And the key point is that this is a local consistency check that does not guarantee that everything is consistent. However, if every pair passes this local consistency check, then you can think about it a bit or prove it by induction. Then if all these local consistency checks pass, then the full views, the whole set of views, has to be consistent with the valid execution of the protocol. Okay, so the conclusion is that the prover has two possible strategies. Okay, so now, let me start with the easy part. Completeness, straightforward. Zero knowledge follows from the fact that the MPC protocol is secure against two parties, so revealing two views to the verifier is fine. How about soundness? So there are two possible strategies for the prover in case that the statement is false. If the statement is false, it means that no matter which W the prover chooses, the relation output 0. So if the protocol is run honestly, the parties will be unhappy in the end. The output is 0. So either the prover runs the protocol honestly on some choice of inputs, in which case all outputs will be 0 and the verifier will certainly reject, or the prover tried to pick a set of inconsistent views that will allow him to make the outputs 1. But in the latter case, as we said, there is at least one pair of conflicting views, and if the verifier is lucky and picks this pair, he will detect the inconsistency and reject. So in this protocol, there is some constant. If the number of parties in the MPC protocol is constant, there is a constant success probability of catching a prover trying to prove a false statement, and you can repeat it 40 times or 80 times and get to the level of soundness that you want. Okay, and you can extend it in multiple ways. You can use an OT-based MPC, because if you open two views, you can also check consistency with the OT, ideal OT oracle. You can, in fact, an idea of Claudio et al., you can use any hybrid model, not just OT, but any function F. You have a different flavor that uses one secure MPC. This has a price on having more commitments, but basically the idea is to commit not only to views, but also to channels, to transcript on each separate channel, and then you can open one view and one incident channel, so now it's okay if the MPC is secure against just one party. And more interestingly, if we want to avoid the cost of this soundness amplification by repetition, so amplifying constant soundness to negligible by repetition, we can use actively secure MPC with many parties, still a big honest majority. And here it's okay to have T be 10% of N. That's good enough. You don't care about, you need good resilience, but it's not that sensitive to the exact constant. And the idea here is basically some kind of a matching, the same type of idea that is used to prove hardness of, to prove an approximation algorithm for vertex cover. If a graph has, in order to pass the test, the graph, okay, good. So if you look at the inconsistency graph of the views, the adversary has two strategies. Either the graph has a small vertex cover, in which case, right, this is a graph between I and J where there is an edge if the view I that the prover committed to is inconsistent with view J, right? Then if the verifier opens both I and J, it will reject. So the prover has two strategies. Either to commit to views that induce a graph that has a small vertex cover, say of size n over 10. If the graph has a small vertex cover, it means that these views can be explained by n over 10 malicious parties, in which case the security of the protocol against malicious parties will ensure that the outputs will be correct. On the other hand, if the graph of inconsistencies does not have a small vertex cover, then it must have a big matching. This is, again, some simple graph theoretic argument. And then if the graph has a big matching, then opening a constant fraction of the views will catch an edge in the matching except with exponentially small probability. Yes? Yeah, it's a trade-off, yes. It's a trade-off between efficiency and, yeah. Excellent question. Yes, there are. This is one proposal I will mention soon, but I'll mention it in the next slide. Okay, this is really related to the next slide. So you can get very simple feasibility results for zero knowledge using simple types of MPC. You can consider honest majority information theoretic MPC, or you can use information theoretic MPC. I didn't describe it, but it's very simple. It's very simple to describe a MPC protocol in the setting of no honest majority that makes use of ideal OT. You basically use the OT oracle to map additive shares of the inputs for a gate to additive shares of the outputs of a gate. So it's a very simple protocol that you can also use in the case where you open two views. Very interestingly, this approach, it kind of lived in theory land until Giacomelli et al. Thought of trying to optimize it, and it turned out that if we look at it several years later, from an asymptotic point of view, we have much better techniques for zero knowledge. However, it's usually the case that the simpler the approach is, the smaller the constants are, so there is some break-even point. So for circuits, verification circuits up to a certain size, this type of approach, which scales linearly, communication here scales linearly with the circuit size, will dominate. And for circuits that are sufficiently big, it will be dominated by other approaches. In this KKW, that's Katz, Kolesnikov, and Wang, they exploited secure computation with correlated randomness. And this paper in between of Chase et al., also Claudio is hidden here, is a paper that actually used the fact that we can apply zero-knowledge proofs towards public key digital signature schemes to build using this so using zero-knowledge proofs that are obtained via MPC in the head, where the zero-knowledge proofs apply to a relation defined by a block cipher. So then you can get public key signatures, and the cool thing about them is that they seem to be post-quantum secure. So the typical efficient signature schemes, they use, say, RSA or similar structures that will be broken if a quantum computer is built. So now this is like a round two contender for a NIST competition. So basically, we might in the future use signatures sign in a way that has a small MPC protocol running inside our signature, maybe someday. Okay, you can also get all kinds of results of zero knowledge, both asymptotic and concrete, by just tapping into the huge literature on MPC. So you can use these AG code-based MPC protocols to get the first basically this is still the best we have. If you want zero knowledge proofs that are sound against computationally unbounded prover, the best communication complexity we have is using this MPC in the head applied to protocols based on algebraic geometric codes. And one would think, and this was a very natural conjecture, that this approach, because in MPC we have the circuit size barrier that I mentioned in the information theoretic regime, you could think that you cannot use information theoretic MPC to get zero knowledge where the communication is below the circuit size. But this is wrong. And the reason it's wrong is that if you recall the protocols I described in the last hour, they have the feature that the total communication complexity of everybody is comparable to the circuit size. So if you pick, say, a number of servers to be the square root of the circuit size and divide the communication between the servers, and you only need to open the view of a small number of servers, then you will get communication complexity that is comparable to the square root of the circuit size. And this is a practical zero-knowledge protocol with Scott Ames, Kermit Chazai, and Mutu, called Ligero. So again, this Ligero is now, at the time it was the first implementable sublinear, sorry. At the time, it was the first implementable sublinear zero-knowledge proof. Now we have other approaches, but still it's very lean, very simple. Prover computation is quite efficient, so for simple tasks, this approach is arguably better. It's somewhere in between this type of protocols which scale linearly with the circuit size, but with very small constant. This scales with the square root of the circuit size and slightly bigger constants, and there is a certain break-even point for which this approach becomes better, and I think it's quite small, actually. So even for the post-quantum signatures, Claudio, did you check optimize Ligero? No, so it might even lead to better. So Camille, did you check? Or? Okay. Yeah, so there are many moving parts and directions for optimization, so it's not always clear when you try to compare different approaches to zero knowledge, it's not over clear which one dominates, but certainly there is a lot of promise for these approaches, especially since they allow us to use, say that you want to prove in zero knowledge statement that involves linear algebra. Now you can use MPC. There is a literature on MPC for linear algebra, where the communication is small and computation is efficient. So the generality of this approach makes it kind of very powerful and potentially very general. Generality makes it general, yes. Okay, so IPS compiler, this is a second instance of the MPC in the head approach, and this is basically applying similar ideas, but in the context not of zero-knowledge proofs, but secure computation with no honest majority. So the idea here is to combine two easy types of MPC protocols, both of which exist information theoretically, and get a more challenging type. So what is the challenging type that we want to get? We want to get actively secure two-party protocols, or more generally, actively secure protocols with no honest majority. What building blocks are we using? Two types of easier protocols. An honest majority actively secure protocol of the type I described in the previous hour. And here again, we can use a strong honest majority. So you can use a very lightweight version of the BGW protocol or the versions that I showed before. And an inner protocol which is only passively secure and can use an OT oracle. So both are considerably easier than designing a 2PC protocol for malicious parties, and we can combine them in a natural way. I will not describe it for lack of time, but essentially you have these servers, you emulate the servers by this inner protocol, which is a two-party protocol over OT, and you have this watchlist mechanism. Basically, the watchlist mechanism is like this type of prison called panopticon that ensures that in the virtual, we use a semi-honest protocol to virtualize a server, and to make sure we don't cheat, I don't know where I'm watched, and you don't know where I'm watching you. So each of us can only cheat in a small number of times, which is being error-corrected by this outer honest majority protocol. That's a high-level idea, but again, it's a very simple and modular approach that allows us to combine existing types of MPC protocols that are easy to get sometimes new protocols that are difficult to obtain by other means. And this has different types of applications, both in terms of simplifying classical results like Killian's results and many different follow-ups, including, I would say, this is a recent CCS paper with a similar group, also with Antonio, that gets two-party protocols for arithmetic circuits that make use of any protocol. You can think of this OLE protocol as an arithmetic version of OT due to Naor and Pincus, and we can use such a passive protocol in a black box way to get arithmetic computation in the two-party setting with active security, where we only invoke roughly a factor of 2 communication overhead over a very simple passively secure protocol. And in some sense, you can even beat passively secure protocols because this error correction of the outer protocol can also accommodate leakage, and this leakage gives you better parameters for lattice-based construction. So in a sense, this approach can also paradoxically give us protocols with active security that can in some cases be better than existing passive secure protocols. Okay, this of course I'm going to skip. This is a different approach that actually you can read it online, and I'm done. Thank you.